Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. We so appreciate it. And if you enjoy the show and the archives, please remember to go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to us so that you'll be able to know when all of our super shows are coming on the air. Want to thank Ken Quiethawk for that amazing intro. You can find him at nativestorytellers.com. He and his wife have an amazing website, and they are carrying on a tradition that is centuries, probably longer than that, old, of relating history and theology through telling of stories. If you haven't heard any of these native stories, you should really take a period of time and go on and listen to some of their recordings. They are phenomenal. And yeah, I think it's important for the kids to learn how history used to be related before there were textbooks. Really a great idea to know your history a little bit better than school seems to be teaching the kids these days. Mark has an amazing show lined up for you. He has two phenomenal people. And as always, I am intrigued by both of them. I think they're spectacular, and I know you will too, because they bring information on areas that, again, aren't covered by the general whatever. So sit back and be prepared to be totally entertained and educated at the same time, which is something the TV can't tell you. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am too. I'm very fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's nice to be back after just doing some summer stuff last week. But we scheduled a special show for this Sunday, 10 to midnight Eastern Time, to make up for the vacation. So, still averaging a show a week. So, by the time we actually get to the 1 year anniversary, we should have our 52 shows on our playlist.
Very impressive. And they've been great shows, too. You've brought some wonderful people to the show, and I have thoroughly enjoyed them. They have been amazing guests.
It's been a really terrific 11 months.
And counting.
I think tonight's just going to be a continuation of the terrificness. And Kat Hobson is our first hour guest. She is the voice of the prestigious Fate Magazine Radio and the owner of WBHM-DB Paranormal Talk Radio. And she's a longtime UFO researcher and will be presenting at a couple of esteemed UFO conferences this fall. So I'd be intrigued to hear more about that shortly. So, hi, Hi, Cap. Welcome to Nightlight.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. We're, I think tonight there's another one of those shows where we have some colleagues making their debuts here with us, and it's just really enjoyable meeting so many new people and having them come on here. We didn't even have to pay you. We wanted to do it, and it's just fun getting people we're working with, and just bring them on and learn from each other. So Fate Magazine has a really long legacy, starting before the late night talk radio weird stuff started happening. So you're involved with this magazine that what should we say? Really kind of got the ball rolling, or paved the way for the rest of us who are interested in wanting to understand the unexplained.
Well, absolutely. We have now been in publication 71 years. That's a lot of strange and unknown to have covered. So, as the little blurbs say, it's really true. 6 decades before The Walking Dead or Paranormal Witness or Coast to Coast AM, the blogs, the books, the movies, that all wound up captivating audiences with true tales of the paranormal. There was Fate. And it's the first of its kind publication. It's been always dedicated to in-depth coverage of mysterious and unexplained phenomenon. It hasn't always been the small journal. It started that way and then went to the regular size magazine and then was pulled back. But it's really a neat thing. People that I talk to, whether they're a guest on my show or I run into them at a conference or wherever, they're just very excited because either they grew up reading Fate or they've had articles appear in Fate, or they shared that experience with grandparents or family members. I get so excited when my guests get so excited to be coming on with me. That's kind of cool.
And you're just keeping the legacy alive.
I am. Phyllis, our editor, is fantastic, and I just absolutely love her. She called me one afternoon and said, I have been thinking about it, and I think that you're supposed to be the voice of Fate. And I thought, well, the online voice of Fate magazine is pretty amazing. I have friends who have filled that role in the past, one of whom is Chase Klotsky, and that's actually how she and I met. Well, she is, but she's a great woman. So, she's been my friend a lot longer than she's been a big name. And it was really neat. We met at Sloss Furnace. She was doing a live feed show at Sloss, and I was doing an event there. And we just kind of clicked. I had no idea that she was doing Fate radio when we were there. We were just talking about other things. And then, we got to know each other pretty well. We're still friends. I'm so looking forward to seeing her in Phoenix at the International UFO Congress
next weekend. Well, not next weekend, the weekend of August 8th. That she's actually the first speaker out of the box after the welcomes and how are yous. So I figured she was worth it enough that I flew in a day early. I'm flying in a day early just to hear her speak. But it's going to be awesome. But yeah, we've had some great hosts, and we've had a couple that, you know, left abruptly, and that's okay. But I love the magazine. You know, it was started in 1948 by Clark Publishing, and it's just amazing. You know, Ray Palmer was the editor of Amazing Stories magazine, and Curtis Fuller, who was an editor, you know, on his own, came together and co-founded this magazine. And the first edition featured an article by Kenneth Arnold, who recounted his 1947 UFO encounter. How cool is that? That's the guy that started the modern UFO era.
Okay. I'll have to look up the passage, but I'll read that in just a minute. But yeah, so Fate's been around for over 70 years now. I know you're only 29, so you haven't been there reading it that long. But
no, I haven't.
What did how did you grow up that got you so interested in the unexplained?
Well, I'm Southern. I know that shocks people who are listening to us, right? But when I've always had the ability to know something was going to happen before it did, or really strong deja vu when I would recognize situations to the level of knowing that if I did A, this would happen, and if I liked that, then that was fine. But if I didn't, I would choose alternate B. It's actually saved my life a few times. And I thought at first I thought it was normal. I thought everyone did that. And I became part of a study because of the frequency of the occurrences, and come to find out not everybody does that. So I thought, well, am I a freak of nature? Is this a good thing? It seems good to me because it has saved me. And I started researching it myself, and I just started being interested in everything that was a little off kilter. If it's anomalous, it fascinates me. I want to find out why it's there. And I've done another radio show for 5 years. Well, in November it will be 5 years. And so it's called Paranormal Experienced, and I started researching the paranormal. It fascinated me. I knew that there's a spiritual aspect to the things that I find sometimes, and it's hard to reconcile that to the science that you need to go into ufology with. But I was fortunate enough to listen to Eric von Däniken so many times last summer. It was a blessing. And every time that he would speak, people would ask him, well, if the aliens were here and if this was happening, and he said, well, the Chariots of the Gods has a question mark at the end of it. It's a search. And B, no matter what I've seen, I've never lost my God. Because no matter how many different people come here or there are in the universe, everything and everyone was created. They didn't just come from nothing. So, no matter how many universes there are or how many, life-bearing planets there are, there's still a creator, and that's my God. So that was a very refreshing and unexpected, I will say, to me, comment. And I just thought he was the bee's knees. I enjoyed hearing him speak so much and had the chance to speak with him a bit too. But if someone go ahead.
Eric is a very kind man, and from my couple days interaction with him, he was very interested in meeting with people, hearing their points of view, just talking with them, how they were affected, explained his thoughts with them as well. I agree with you about your assessment of him. I think he's just if you're going to work in some of the UFO spirituality type information, I think he does exemplify a blend of those subjects, and he just seems to be a person who shows compassion to others.
Yes. Yes, he does.
And I did find that passage. I actually had the book here. I was doing some prep for Steve for the next hour, but I know this. John Keel was writing this passage in the 60s, and you noted Fate was started in the late 40s, but
yes,
there's a little time difference, but what John wrote shows a link between the two dates, and in the Mothman Prophecies on page 137, he writes, the UFO waves of the 1960s were accompanied by the occult explosion. But there does seem to be a connection from the 1940s and some of these sightings in the 60s, and in this example, Keel was writing about in the Point Pleasant, West Virginia area where the Mothman was, and it's just continued to this day. Well, and Eric continued it in 1968, 69 with the publication of Chariots of the Gods. So I think that what you're discussing shows a almost like a uninterrupted 20-year span of accurate observations of this phenomenon.
I agree. And what's amazing is that there were such vast and varied examples of anomalous phenomenon, from Mothman and the various other monsters that have shown up in different places, to because we were talking about the Flatwoods monster, which was also in that area. They're not very far apart. So,
right.
It's really something else. And you go up and you have, the anomalous marine monsters. which fascinate me too because I'm a water person, then then you have the land-based monsters, which I think Mothman would come under, as well as Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever region you're in and what you call them. But it's been being reported for forever. A lot of it's been being reported for centuries. And it's really hard to toss out the baby with the bathwater when you're going back for hundreds of years with documentation and tales of experiences that match in the areas, that match in the behaviors, that match in the appearances, all the way down from then to now. To me, that's fascinating, especially before there was mass media, before people, even newspaper publications that went across the country and such, before the wire services. All of this was happening then too. So it's not just a social media phenomenon. It's been going on forever. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and since you just brought up mass media and the water monsters, it's kind of take a slight detour, but we're still sticking with the unexplained. But in the Book of Job, you get that aquatic cryptid living in the Jordan River, and had the what's described as tail as thick as the cedars of Lebanon. We aren't sure exactly what kind of creature is being discussed in that passage. But the Bible does present a cryptid, and
presented a cyclops too.
Okay.
And a giant.
We got several examples of giants, but we did. The giants are discussed later in the Book of Genesis, but you really don't get Nessie and Mothman and Bigfoot in those the list of all the animals that are created at the beginning of Genesis. It doesn't mean that there just wasn't enough room. It doesn't mean they weren't ever created. It just they just weren't mentioned early on. But do you think that those, or what's now cryptids to us, were created way back at the beginning, and it might have been a little bit more prevalent then, and we're just rediscovering them now, or do you think that they're just appearing now for some reason to teach us a lesson?
I think they're appearing now because we're destroying their habitat, and they are being caught out more often than they would have been because we are prolific at destroying environments. We go through the Amazon rainforests and just clear cut. We go through the southern pine forests and just clear cut for pulpwood. We, are building houses in places that probably shouldn't be supporting structured neighborhoods like that. I mean, we build places. You can look at California and the fire zones. People are living where there's going to be fires. It's a given. They're tender dry. One good bolt of lightning and everything's going to go.
Right.
And not singling out California, but it's a strong example of, building your house on the rock and not the sand kind of a thing.
Oh, there's a big fire last year. That was just documented.
There's a big fire almost every year.
Mm-hmm.
At some point along that coast, there's going to be, it wasn't long ago that it was in Malibu, just at the other end of the coastline. So it is something that happens with alarming regularity and such great loss of life, as well as property. The life is what matters. And it's very concerning that, I understand wanting a view. I want a view, but I don't want to be putting myself or my family in jeopardy to have it. And I think that it's irresponsible development that is kind of making these creatures come out or be seen when, decades ago you just knew they were there. People knew they were there, but they didn't, it's kind of a live and let live thing.
Since we are destroying environments, and maybe we are finding more evidence of Bigfoot. Have any of your guests, or do you have a theory about? Okay, what are we learning from Bigfoot? Are they telling us something about the environment?
Well, I don't think I'm the right person to put words in Bigfoot's mouth at all, because I have not encountered one personally. But I do know that if you watch the other animals of the forest and such as that, I live in a metropolitan area. I was on my way home and driving up the hill towards my street, and I thought it was a deer crossing in front of me, and I looked over, and it looked very sick, but it was a coyote, which is unusual. They don't come. I have a mountain of woods between me and another area. For them to come out of the woods in the daytime, I've never seen that here, and I've lived here for 25, 30 years. So that was disconcerting. But that is another animal that we are driving into what is for them a dangerous environment. If somebody were to see him, then they would call animal control or shoot him or whatever, and all he was hungry because he was having to come out during the daytime, which is not their normal hunting time. And that was just bizarre. And he, as I said, he did not look healthy. And, my heart kind of went out to him because it was terrible for him. He got seen by a human. That's not supposed to happen in his world.
Well, I understand. Since you're in Alabama, and there's such a rich Southern literary legacy. I just wondered have you encountered anything about ghosts or paranormal sightings, hauntings associated with F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda, or William Faulkner? James Dickey wrote Deliverance. Is there any? I just have an interest in that subject. I just
in historic hauntings based, or was perhaps the literature based on something?
Yeah, I was just wondered if you heard anything about that.
Well, I have not, and I have been.
Okay.
I actually am a paranormal investigator, and I have opted to go toward the research side now, and that's what this new study group that I've put together with my associate Frank Lee is about. But I have got to tell you that down here, Faulkner, I believe, was Kentucky, and I'm just always amazed. We had a woman here who most of us looked up to, and if I could be the raconteur that she was, I would be thrilled. Her name was Katherine Tucker Wyndham, and she wrote a series of books, the first of which that I read was 13 Southern Ghosts. Then she wrote 13 Alabama Ghosts, and then she went around the Southeast. But in the 13 Southern Ghosts, I have been to the places that she wrote about. And when I was in 6th grade, she actually came and spoke at my school. And she was brilliant, and she was the classic caricature of a Southern woman. It was the very Southern voice, the very, put together with the hat and that stuff. And she had her own ghost that resided in her home, and she called him Jeffrey, and he went everywhere with her. He came to my school, which was an interesting thing when you're in 6th grade, and this lady that you've been reading for 4 or 5 years is sitting there, and she has the ghost that you thought would be great to meet right there with her. Is it any wonder so many of us are fascinated by the paranormal down here, right? But that is someone, she wrote about the Myrtles, which is in Louisiana. She wrote about the library that was in the town I lived in when I was able to see her. It's the library in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where so much happened. There's a Freedman House. There's just all kinds of places. And it was fascinating. I had never met a professional author before, and then she was telling, I knew all of her stories, so it was neat. So that is someone whose paranormal, whose literary characters and experiences I have experienced as paranormal.
I just had a flash going through my mind about some of the Southern authors. I just wondered about that. But there are like the Myrtles. Some of those plantations. You get. Kind of going to get into maybe contrasting maybe some of the Southern battlefields versus
oh my gosh, yes.
Gettysburg, where you just came back from. It's just kind of you're going back and forth between both regions of the country, and I'm just wondering. Are you picking up any differences? Just seeing, the afterlife is the same in both regions. I'm just kind of throwing out some questions about your experiences in two widely divergent regions.
Well, that is actually a fantastic question, because I was very surprised the first time I went to Gettysburg. I was anticipating people being fearful or, trying to build up their machismo, I guess, to go into battle, to be able to actually get up that morning and go fight. Because all of Gettysburg was a battlefield, not just the marked battlefields. People were fighting through the streets. Everything was really terrible. But when I first went there for this Gettysburg Battlefield Bash, which is a great fundraiser for Pennsylvania Wounded Warriors, I was shocked because I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. What I felt was a quiet resolution, because these people, if they ran, they would be shot or hung as deserters. If they fought, the odds of surviving the day were slim and none. So they had to do what they had to do. And they stood a better chance, I think, of surviving going forward, because it was just terrible. And you could feel that they knew it wasn't going to work very well. But another thing that surprised me was that both times that I've been there, I have had the sensation of voices, and it's both times it has been, do not let this happen again. This cannot happen again. This was horrible. Don't do this. It's ridiculous that it got to this point. And I just feel like in today's day and time, that was really interesting. I felt like it was a directive almost, and maybe they're aware of current times and they're just trying to guide. I'm really clueless on that, but it was so clear. It was overwhelming. The whole Gettysburg area is actually overwhelming. There's so much there, and
just if you watch some of the ghost hunting TV shows, a lot of the investigations may happen near tickets charge, but you also have really disturbing scenes at some of the inns that were just makeshift hospitals. Did you encounter anything on your trip last weekend from one of the hotels in the area?
What I encountered was just walking down the streets in broad daylight.
Oh, really?
Excuse me. Yes, it was interesting because I had gone to have breakfast at a place called the Lincoln Diner, and which was very retro and very cool. And I had investigated in that area last year. So I was going to walk toward the roundabout, which is where the old structures and the old hotels, it's just lovely. And as I'm walking down the street, it's like you can hear people walking up beside you, and there's no one there. And I am not given to fancy. I mean, it is what it is, or it's not. And it was very unusual. Blew me out of the water. I didn't know what to think. I was getting out of someone's way, saying, "Pardon me," and there wasn't anybody there. So that was an unusual moment in time. But like I said, that whole area was involved in that battle. The whole town was involved in that battle. And it's just really something else. I went actually with my friend Tim Conwell to Devil's Den. He had never been to Gettysburg, and, he wanted to experience some of the area. So we went to Devil's Den, which is in smack dab in the middle of the battlefield, and is fairly infamous because people were trapped down in there as they were being fired on from the top of a hill. And they were trying to find anywhere they could to hide, and it was not working for them. So it's almost eerie because it was the people that were supposed to go in and take care of the dead and injured afterwards I was told they did not do a good job of that. So how do you disrespect people in that circumstance? I just did not understand that or care for it at all. But it was an unusual sensation in there. Tim, who is a sensitive, said that he did not really feel anything there, and I was frankly mesmerized by the Milky Way. I don't get to see that much, but the peace and the calm is what we were feeling, and I thought that was a beautiful thing, because who could imagine there being peace and calm in the middle of the battlefields of Gettysburg?
Yeah, that's a really intriguing response. You're talking about, but both of you have, you and Tim have a similar reaction. Yeah. But you also get the other people just talk of, after they run away and catch their breath on some of these shows. We're talking about, it was a frightening experience.
Well, it could be. I mean, depending on what you invoked. If you watch some of these television shows, first and foremost, they are for entertainment purposes.
Right.
And they are for drama. People harass the Ghost Adventures crew, but their host was a theater major. And he has done quite well. He is dramatic. The only thing I worry about with him is that his show is so popular that young people want to emulate him. And I think there's a danger in that, because you can't confront something that you can't see, and you don't know who you're dealing with. Even if you're using a spirit box, or if you're using a video and you're seeing something or hearing something. I never use a Ouija board because I think that they are innately bad. And that's my opinion. I know they're plastic and cardboard, and I also know that intent carries a lot of weight. But, it's dangerous to go and just yell and be aggressive and confrontational with something that you have no idea how it's going to react back. You know, if you went into one of these haunted houses and it did happen to have a spirit or something there, and you went in like that, it would be the equivalent of somebody, you know, doing a home invasion on your home. And you would not react well to that, I think. So, like at the battlefields, I think that these were people who died under extreme duress. They died under horrible conditions. They were amputees that, you know, bled out, or it was not a good death for any of them. And so you have somebody who's coming and trying to be intrusive and trying to be aggressive in their face, and they probably should run panting down the road, because I don't understand why people would still be there. But I have experienced enough to know that there is an opportunity for people to, for whatever reason, still be there. I don't know why, or something to happen. But I can't imagine being so cruel as to go up and harass those people if they're still there. I think that's mean, and I think that you should always be careful when you try to be mean to something you can't see. So, excuse me.
Kat, since you just brought that up, I always wondered about what got me thinking was, being mean to something you can't see. It's a little bit like the in the early 1840s, Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, and you get like that interdimensional situation going on, and it's actually kind of like a sci-fi novella where Scrooge and the different ghosts are observers of how people are acting, with him being dead and stuff like that, but they can't see him, and
right.
Then in the 20 years later, the Civil War happens, and you get a little bit of what we've been discussing from your observations from last weekend. Seem like they are supporting Dickens's interdimensional travel, and and then we also get that appearing with the Bigfoot studies too. Is Fate magazine covering, or has been covering that recently, or do you have views on the interdimensional travel? It's a really fascinating subject.
It is, and something that always amazes me is how timely the articles in Fate are. And I do want to say that we lost our executive editor, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, recently, and it's just not going to be the same without her. But she was a brilliant author in her own right, and she had a great eye for good writers. It is amazing to me that they do stay just on top of things. But it's because the writers, the contributors, have that. they have their finger on the pulse of their field, and the new one that has come out, I'm actually going to be taking them with me to Phoenix to hand out. But it's just always up to date. There's good stuff. There's good information. The writers are current researchers. So yes, they cover all the things that are going on in the anomalous topic fields. And I think that the interdimensional, I don't know, Mark, that it's interdimensional, but I do know that there is some form of interaction between wherever they are and what is going on still. That just amazes me.
I think I share in the same amazement. Maybe I'm not using the right term, but there just seems to be something there that we don't really understand. But
absolutely,
there have been authors who have discussed it, and it's not just recent sci-fi authors or theorists. There's a long tradition. I'm not sure what it is either, but it's really cool.
It is.
Well, and we're we have like 7.5 minutes or so left, but just another quick subject, and we can get into you plugging your upcoming appearances. But one of your favorite topics that you like discussing on your shows is some of these ancient engineering topics.
Yes.
That
absolutely.
How did they do this kind of work? And there's no evidence of beating a stone to chisel out, like Kumu Punku. What's your view on that? Because I don't know. I'm looking to you for an expert answer.
Well, I'm married to a machinist, so full disclosure there. My husband is astounded with these Hblocks. And, when you see them on the television shows, they look massive, right? But they're not. They're relatively small. And they are precision machined. You will never convince me that they did that with a rock and a chisel. And I know that there was amazing artistry then, but seriously, I mean, you can't even get a piece of paper between them. They're so precise. And to him, that just blows his mind. It's like, how did they do that? I just can't imagine that. And it's fascinating. And you go over and you look at the Great Pyramids, heck, the Mayan pyramids, if you want to stay in Central America. But it's just amazing what these people did so long ago, and in such a time frame, because I was speaking with an Egyptologist who frequents the television networks, and he said that they had found a document that was, pretty much a journal by one of the construction foremen on the Grand Pyramid, the Great Pyramid, and they completed that project in half the time that it was believed to have, until they found that document that they had believed that it took. I believe it was like 27 years versus 40-something years. But they still don't know how they moved the stones or, how they got them there. And apparently in that document, he does discuss a bit of that. So, it's his journal. So how cool is that? That we have no idea how they do it. And I don't necessarily think that everything was ancient aliens bringing the technology to, boom, there you go. But it's a fascinating thing when you look back at some of the art and some of the glyphs. I mean, they're just amazing. And then you have the geoglyphs also in Peru where, Van Daniken said that there were thousands of them the first time that he ever flew over there. Flew over it. And
they're best
most of them are gone
viewed
now.
From the air. Yeah.
They're only viewed from the air. You don't know what they are if you're not looking at them from the air.
Yep.
So that's a little freaky.
Yep.
They weren't flying then as far as we know.
The ancient human imagination is mind-boggling.
Well, they didn't have MTV and all that stuff then.
Yeah.
They were creative.
Yeah, and we're maybe on the more of a de-evolution pattern, but we can save that for another time. But in the couple minutes we have left, let's talk about your upcoming appearances at these two big conferences.
Well, I'm actually not speaking at the UFO Congress. I am covering the UFO Congress for Fate Mag and for WBHMDB. But I am speaking and introducing my new venture for the first time August 24th, and that's going to be a conference up in North Alabama. I'm excited about that because I've never spoken with this group before, so it's going to be cool. And in October, I'm going to be doing another event for them, which is going to be significantly bigger. It's called CryptoCon, and it's going to be down on the Gulf Coast. Oh, yeah. It's going to be neat.
Are there websites?
Yes. And it's really fun. It's abnormal, ABNORMAL, abnormalalabama.com. And I think they're a fairly new group. It is created by W.K. Graham, Kelsey Graham, who is a very interesting and diverse person in his own right. It's going to be interesting. And we just announced our new venture and, describing it and discussing what we would be doing yesterday. And we've already been approached for different conferences relevant to that too. So you never know what the future is going to hold. Yeah. I was really surprised that the response was so quick, but I think people are just hungry for science to address the paranormal, and that's what we plan to do.
Okay. Cool. And I just had one quick question from Seminole Lisa. Did you know Lorraine Warren?
No, I was not fortunate enough to meet her. I am saddened by that. I know so many people who actually worked with her, and she was just brilliant and classy and a good researcher and a good psychic. I I know different people had different opinions, but that's mine. And I think she was something special.
Okay. So, Kat, you're on Sunday nights, 8 to 10 on Fate Mag Radio.
Fate Mag Radio is, you can hear us fatemag.net, or you can hear us on wbhm-db.com. Both of those have the same chat, so if you're on Fate or the network, you can hear us and chat with us. And I do monitor chat. We are also available on Spreaker, and if you look under WBHM-DB, then you will find the shows. And I also host Paranormal Experience Radio on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 Eastern on WBHM-DB.com.
Okay. Well, Kat, how about we wrap there, and we'll resume sometime soon with more of your insights into the paranormal. I enjoyed our discussion tonight, and we just need to temporarily stop and bring on our next guest. And
absolutely, he's going to be awesome.
And hang up with us, then tune in for the second hour, and just enjoy. Steve's great.
He is great. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so
all right,
we will be in touch.
All right. Well, you have a good night and enjoy that conversation with Steve Ward. That's going to be fun for you. He is neat.
Yeah. Okay,
and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. And thanks to the listeners as well. Bye.
Okay. Barbara, that was a fun chat.
Yeah, she's a neat person.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. I almost hopped in to talk about my ghost that I have with me at my house, but
I could have.
Hello.
Okay.
Well,
there he is. There's Steve. Okay. How are you today, Steve?
Good. Doing good.
Good. Okay. We need to do a little intro here. Yeah.
All right.
Steve and I have this mutual friend, and recently, Brent posted something, and Steve made a comment, and like, so I think from the Mothman, conference last year, and he said, yeah, that was me, and he said, oh, yeah, you're the guy who's like, he spoke after I got off stage. Said, yeah, that was me too, and so it's like, oh, okay, hey, let's do a show Tuesday and get weird. Steve said, "Oh yeah, I'm ready any day of the week to get weird with you. So let's do it." So it gives you a little background of how Nightlight Part 2 gets guests. But yeah,
we're solid. We're solid professionals here. You know that.
Yeah, and yes, Steve Ward is our second hour guest, and you may have heard him on his Strangeness Factor radio show, or his reporting for Mac Maloney's Military X-Files radio show, and he worked with the Roads Beyond the Known web series, and Steve is going to be returning to the Mothman Festival this year too. So that's just a little bio of. We've kind of known each other and got sidetracked for a while, and now we're back together where we should be to continue the evening's conversation into the unusual. So, how's your day going, Steve?
It's going pretty good. I did a Mac Maloney show earlier today. We always tape the show on Tuesdays. It's a podcast, so it airs later. And sometimes he pieces them together. We never know which segments are going to end up when and when they're going to show up. But he did a best of show for me from my segments. I've been with Mac about 3.5 years now. And now I don't ever listen to myself on the podcast. So a friend of mine listened to it. See, Mac has a nickname for me, Switchblade. Long story, but he started out calling me Stiletto Steve. And he used to make a crack when I would come on. He'd make some. I lived east of Battle Creek, which of course is Cereal City. So he would make a crack about Tony the Tiger or whatever. So finally I said, after a few weeks, I said, Mac, they're probably envisioning some guy in a Tony the Tiger T-shirt wearing stiletto high heels. So he said, well, he's from Boston. A stiletto in Boston's a deadly weapon, right? So he had compassion. He re-nicknamed me Switchblade. I guess because it's military X-Files, we're supposed to have some kind of association with weapons, even though nobody lets me anywhere around sharp objects anyway. So there you go.
Yeah,
but what I was saying is, in the old, there must have been a really old segments because he was calling me Stiletto Steve back then on that special.
Yeah, Mac has a lot of information on all these military UFO encounters. He's a sharp guy on all those subjects, and he published a book several years ago, I believe. It has all the Roman era UFO sightings after some Julius Caesar's battle at Actium or whatever.
Right.
Something like that. Yeah,
he's written a lot of fiction. His famous series is the Wingman series, which is a lot of fun. But the book you're referring to is UFOs in Wartime. So he went through history and he talked about sightings of UFOs from like you say, the Roman soldiers to the so-called Foo Fighters of World War II, and other encounters throughout the years with an emphasis on wartime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mac presents some very compelling cases. Anyhow, Steve, you are going to be returning to Point Pleasant next month. We're going to get together. Brent Range is going to be there. Brent's going to be coming up in on August 27th for our 1-year anniversary show.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and he's actually going to be returning. So that's a great way to celebrate the occasion. But so all of us are going to get together next month. Was it the third weekend of September at Point Pleasant?
It's always the third weekend in September, and it's unfortunate because there's so many events like this now that they're always are going to conflict somewhere. But yeah, Brent will be speaking about his recent book he wrote on John Keel, and I've started the book, and he let me read some of the PDF last year because Jeff Walmsley, who is the co-founder of the Mothman Festival and the curator of the Mothman Museum, asked me to speak on John Keel. And so Brent was kind enough to, and also Rosemary, of course, Rosemary Ellen Guy, we just lost very recently, just a great lady and a great name in the paranormal and this kind of research. She was going to be publishing it for him, and she wrote the introduction. And so they both gave me permission to use whatever I wanted to from that PDF, and it was really invaluable in talking about John Keel.
And before we talk a little bit about your lecture, you're also going to be involved in another activity with the Mothman Festival. Can you tell us a little bit about what else you'll be doing?
Well, we'll let's see. As it goes right now, it looks like on Saturday, I think it's 2 p.m. That's when Rosemary was going to be speaking. And so Jeff asked if I would and some other people were going to have a very informal talk, and we're going to have people remembering Rosemary, which would be nice to do that because she was such an important part of the Mothman Festival and an important part of so many lives that have been involved with the Mothman Festival. My co-author, Joey Medea, we're writing a book. The title right now will be Parallels and Patterns, a new paradigm for the study of paranormal phenomena. We'll be speaking early on Sunday. And now also, I think Jeff is going to have me introduce some of the speakers. But for those that know the Mothman lore, they know that one of the first major sightings was in the infamous TNT area, which is just about 6 miles north of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And that was they called it the TNT area because it was a munitions area where they built explosives for the war effort during World War II. And if you look at any of the old black and white photographs of that area, it was just a huge complex. Well, since then, it's the McClintock Wildlife Area, long abandoned. And even back in the middle 60s, when the Mothman was seen, it was a pretty rough-looking area. But what we do on Saturday nights during the festival, we have 3 basically hay rides, and I do one of the tours through the TNT area. It's a cart pulled by a big tractor, and it's set up a little bit like a Halloween hayride, but there is a guarantee of harassment by the dastardly men in black, and a guaranteed flyover of the Mothman if John and Tim are on their game.
Okay, it's everyone's going to have a good time, no matter where you are during the festival. It's always fun.
It is always fun, and it really has everything. It's Saturday and Sunday. They have speakers all day, Saturday and Sunday, at the old State Theater, and they have where the Mothman statue sits is right next to the Mothman Museum, which, by the way, the museum is very well done, just very well put together. And there's that road which is crosses the main drag there. Mm-hmm. Is where most of the vendors are set up, but mostly the speakers have their tables there. And then up and down Main Street, you have the obligatory festival type, the T-shirts being sold, all kinds of food, and plenty of stuff for the kids. So the area where for the in quotes serious researchers is kind of separate, but yeah, it just really does. In the area, I mean, you've got this great geography. You're right on the banks of the Ohio River. You're across from Gallipolis, Ohio. And, it's got everything. It's got the geography. It's got the mountains. It's got the history. So it's just a great place to be during the festival.
Yeah, Steve, how did you get interested in these unexplained phenomena, like the Mothman? Or, what was your upbringing that got opened your mind to this kind of subject?
Yeah, we all have kind of a beginning, don't we? And that's one of the questions I ask on my show, because I'm always curious. Because now some people are experiencers, and that's what pulled them in, but I'm not an experiencer. I had heard, known a little bit about UFOs. A friend of mine introduced me to the great anthologies of Frank Edwards, Stranger Than Science, Strangest of All, and he would write stories about, some of the classic cases I learned about first through Frank Edwards, like the Flatwoods Monster and the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins in Kentucky. I even learned about Bigfoots, even before they were calling him Bigfoot, I think. There was a chapter in one of his books called The Monster Apes of Oregon, which was pretty exciting. But that, I think, probably stirred the interest a bit. But then in March of 1966, there was a huge UFO flap in Michigan. And I know it wasn't just in Michigan, it was several other places. And there were very credible sightings by police officers and so forth. And this was essentially in my backyard. I mean, I grew up just north of Detroit. And these were hitting places like Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti and Dexter and Hillsdale and so forth. And that this will mark it in people's minds, whether they lived through it or read about it. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who, of course, is the subject of a TV show recently called Project Blue Book, which I detest, by the way, but that's just me. He was still attached to Project Blue Book, which was kind of, in my opinion, a debunking organ and a public relations gambit for the Air Force. Well, he was an astronomer from Northwestern University. And he had, at that time period, he had been changing his thinking. He was a skeptic and he was a debunker. But he did say that he thought some of the sightings in Michigan, some might be swamp gas. And that's all the press had to hear, because then everything was swamp gas. But it was great. I mean, this is the invading alien hordes were landing in my backyard just about. But the big event was that following November. That's one of the first major sightings of the Mothman. This one was where he chased the two couples down Route 62 out of the TNT area into Point Pleasant. And that came across the wire services. That went all over the world. So I think that was the beginnings. And, of course, I sought out, like so many of us did, any books we could find, which were pretty scarce, in the local library. And there weren't many programs at that time on the subject, but that's pretty much what sparked it, I think.
Okay, and since we're talking about what events got you going down this path of exploration. You brought up that some of John Keel's books had an influence on you, as well as Jacques Vallée. How did their writings impact you?
Yeah, it was major. I started out as a guy. There's a lot of people like John Keel. John Keel, of course, the author of the Mothman Prophecies. Jacques Vallée, author of many books, including Passport to Magonia and several other ones. A lot of people had sort of I wouldn't call it a learning curve, but they start out thinking these things are extraterrestrial nuts and bolts craft, and then something else happens. Things don't quite add up. And I was pretty happy with that paradigm. I mean, I was reading books by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. Now, they were the heads of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. And, of course, Donald Kehoe was the head of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. It's interesting because Kehoe was pretty much friends with Frank Edwards, who wrote those anthologies and who was actually a news broadcaster and a journalist. Kehoe was happy all day long with reporting on lights in the sky, but he got very uncomfortable when people started talking about not even abductions, but the Lorenzans were reporting about these landings and people seeing these little creatures, next to the craft or whatever. That's what, back to Dr. Hynek, he's the first one to come up with the categories, the close encounter categories. Close encounter of the first kind is pretty much a sighting of a UFO in close proximity. The second kind is where the craft or whatever it is leaves burn marks, tripod marks, some kind of physical evidence. And third kind is seeing one of these entities nearby. And so that was kind of the state at the time. Kehoe did not want to talk about that. And I was reading John Keel at times, and Keel was pretty much in the ET camp early on, but he had seen a couple of these things. He saw one as a 7-year-old kid in about 1937, and he saw another one when he was in Egypt near one of the Great Pyramids. So, but Keel came. He wrote a book called, originally it was called Strange Creatures from Time and Space, which has since been retitled to, I think, the Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings. And he talks about all kinds of entities and creatures and so forth. But he first proposed the idea of window areas. And these are areas where a lot of different types of paranormal phenomena all seem to come together, like cryptids and strange lights in the sky. He was trying to account for the fact that these things seem to just kind of show up out of nowhere, scare the heck out of people, leave footprints and so forth and physical evidence, and then they disappear. But the book that really, really threw me for a loop, and I came kicking and screaming, was his UFOs Operation Trojan Horse. And this was written before the Mothman Prophecies, which focused on the events in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in the mid-'60s. In Trojan Horse, he demonstrates that all paranormal phenomena seems to be interconnected. And there's a lot to say about that, but he began to think that some of the things people were seeing, he began to think, now his thinking wasn't static and it did change, but he thought that perhaps the only real objective thing that was objectively real about these experiences were the strange lights in the sky. And that when people were seeing the cryptid or a craft or whatever, that it was perhaps some kind of projection or transmogrification, I love that word, of energy. He thought that it wasn't that important that the craft, how many windows it had or if it had a tripod. He wanted to seek out the cosmic mechanism behind that. And just give you a little more on that. He used a term called, instead of extraterrestrial, because he began to believe that these things were a natural condition of the planet. Now, in later years, he did leave the door open for ET, but he believed that that these things were, he used the term ultra-terrestrial, like I said, and he borrowed the term from Ivan Sanderson. Ivan Sanderson was the great British naturalist living in New Jersey that, he even had a show on animals on NBC years ago. Sanderson is probably best known for writing The Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life, and he wrote other really great books on UFOs. So that was the term. Keel used the term ultra-terrestrial as kind of a literary device, he said, but also to suggest that we probably need to be looking inward or right here in our own backyard rather than off planet to explain some of these things. And then I barely recovered from reading Trojan Horse. And then I read Jacques Vallée. You know what it's like. You go along, you're very happy with your comfortable paradigm, little aliens jumping out of spaceships, collecting soil samples. And then Vallée made the connection between various traditions and folklore and modern day UFO experiences. So, yeah, those two books early on really changed my thinking.
Since part of this second hour is a little bit of a homage to John Keel and laying the foundations for Brent's appearance with us in 3 weeks or so. You were just talking about Keel changed his opinions throughout his writing. I was wondering, does a researcher in the paranormal field who may be vacillating some, said changing his opinion, does that weaken his standing, or do you find like it makes him a more powerful observer, that he adapted his views with more information that became available over time? How does that impact his legacy?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. So my idea is that if I had stayed with my comfortable paradigm, I interviewed a lady last year who had a close encounter experience, an abduction, and I applied some of the same questions that John Keel did. But if I had been frozen in the 60s, I never would have, gone further and asked those kinds of questions. So what I believe is that if you follow the reports and the experiences, what people tell you, that they're going to run into things sometimes that don't fit a comfortable, I keep using the word paradigm, but we all have, ideas of what these things are. And I think even to some degree we have kind of our favorite theories, that we would like it to be. But we have to watch that. So I think that, yes, you have to, I have gone back and forth. There was a time when I was with John Keel early on, and I completely rejected the ET hypothesis. I thought we were dealing with something like these things we were seeing were more like phantasms, like a sort of a planetary poltergeist, paraphysical, having physical effect within our environment. But I've tempered that a bit. I also think that well, number one, there's very few things I can say in an absolute sense, and I will say in an absolutely that there is more than one answer to all these things. There's not just one. And so, yes, I think you're far more powerful if you examine the evidence, listen to the people. Of course, we always have to assess, their credibility. But what I look at, my thing, and this is, started with John Keel and Jacques Vallée, is I'm interested in patterns, in parallels, in things in between. I'm interested in these high strangeness areas, or people call them portals or vortexes. Stan Gordon studied that area in Pennsylvania in 73, 74, where people were seeing Bigfoot and UFOs, and they were having Men in Black experiences. Of course, Point Pleasant, it wasn't just Mothman, it was UFOs, Men in Black. I guess there were some animal mutilations in the area. There was also some Bigfoot-like creature being seen. And also in Brent's book, by the way, which I've started reading, he talks about a Swedish researcher that came to Point Pleasant when all these things were going on. He interviewed several of the original Mothman witnesses. I've been able to talk to about 6 of them. And he said that virtually everyone, after their experience of seeing the Mothman, by the way, they were describing a creature that was about 7 feet tall, red glowing eyes, maybe a 10-foot wingspan, roughly man-like. But he said that all these people were experiencing poltergeist phenomena when they got home. So, when we start to see patterns, both from the past to the present, to what we consider different types of paranormal phenomena, then I think we should take notice. And it's really, it's really helps to go back in time to examine these cases, because people didn't know much at all about this stuff. We weren't saturated with TV shows and so forth. Although there's a lot of people don't know a lot of the, what I want to say. There's some areas still that are very unknown, people that don't know about. They'd have to really read certain types of literature to find out. So, yeah, you have to. I have this middle ground of my suspend judgment file. There's some things I can reject out of hand, some things I accept, readily. But so many things are in kind of a state of flux because we really don't know what's going on.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's what we learned from Kat in the first hour, and you're giving us a continuing education of the need to research. It changes over time, and I asked a question about like vacillating on conclusions of theories, because one of my favorite authors, Dr. William Webb, who wrote a lot of books on the excavations of mounds. He made some observations, early on. He changed his opinions, and 50 years later, today's archaeologists, kind of point that out as, he was a flawed researcher. I just like more. It's just after excavating, say, 40 more mounds since he wrote, the original, made his original proclamation. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe we ought to. I need to reevaluate that. I'm doing what I can to make accurate reports to the public. I want them to understand, but I may have made a mistake. And it just seems like in this field, where in the 60s and 70s, there might not have been a lot of information for Keel to base his work on, but he's still doing pioneering work, and you and Brent and some of the other people just keep going back to what John Keel said, and it's like, we're kind of finding evidence that is being that supports his theories, and even in the Mothman prophecies book, Keel does talk about the UFO activity in the Ohio Valley was centered around, I said, they show a penchant for the ancient Indian mounds.
Yes, and
they're there.
Yes, and he was said something very interesting. He mused, what came first? Did the people build the mounds, and then their worship of the mounds create, thought forms or tulpas or whatever, or were the lights there first, and did they, trigger them to build these incredible mounds? And very interesting, because Linda Godfrey, who is done great research into the Dogman phenomena, these upright canids that people are seeing, and she's written several books on it. of course, she hails from Wisconsin, and she originally started talking about the sightings around Bray Road, which are just east of Elkhorn. And she one time was sort of by accident. She had made a map of the sightings, the clusters of dogmen, so to speak. And she noticed, I forget the reference book, but there's a book of Wisconsin mounds, and this is kind of in southeastern Wisconsin. She found an area with mostly the, I think, panther effigies and the water spirit effigies, which were just virtually identical when she overlaid a map of the dogman sightings. So it's very much like these things, these whatever they are. And I'm not convinced they're flesh and blood because they're very elusive. They're almost like apparitions sometimes. But there seems to be a connection there. And just one other thing, which occurs to me, Dr. Greg Little, and he's written several great books. I think it's called I can't remember now.
Oh, Barbara, we need you to answer this question about the title of Greg's book.
It's one of his first ones, way back. It was after the archetype experience, but it had to do with mounds and so forth. But
which book?
Anyway, wasn't the Atlantis one?
No.
Oh, the Atlantis. That's such a great book.
People, something about people and the circle there are in the title. It's a long title, but anyway, he recounts an incident of a man who was driving near that incredible serpent mound in Ohio. And it's in November, and he just gets this urge to, like so many people get urges to go to a certain spot and they're abducted or whatever. That goes back in history too, because people that had encounters with the fairies, they call that being pixie led. But anyway, he has this urge to go to the Serpent Mound. It's off season, but he goes there anyway. And there's some kind of an incredible energy going on. He sees these leaves are kind of it's like they're being pulled up on top of the mound, and it's almost like a whirlwind. And he's really freaked out at first, and then he thinks, "My God, if I could only get my camera." And of course, if anybody knows the logistics of the Serpent Mound, the parking lot isn't real close by. And of course, by the time he got back, it was all done. But for what it's worth, his distinct feeling was that the ancients built this mound in that area because there was something inherent in that area. The energy was already there.
Oh, it's inside a meteorite crater.
Right.
There are also reports of crop circles near the Serpent Mound.
Oh yes, there was some years ago. We talked a few years ago. We talked to the guy that was behind the desk, and he told us about it. That's a whole other area that's fascinating. I mean, obviously, many of them are man-made, but boy, if you go back in history, there were things they used to call witch circles or devil circles, and sometimes they would actually see them being created before their eyes. And you know how you've heard that people that go into crop circles, their cameras will malfunction, their EMF meters will burn out, or a circuit board, or even people's energies feel drained. Whether if you go back, and there was one in 1927 in England where the guy had seen these before. Well, he went into the circle. His dog wouldn't follow him. He stuck his knife in the soil. It magnetized the blade, and his compass would only point toward that circle. So some of these things do seem to have a unexplained or paranormal, if you will, connection. Although in what was it, 2003, I read a book by Dr. Simeon Hine called Opening Minds. And he detailed how there are a lot of people that would get together, meditate, and form, create these magnificent crop circle designs. Well, even some of those are interesting because sometimes some of those people that have been out there under cover of darkness will see these little light balls show up. And sometimes it's freaked them out. Like, what the heck is that? What's going on there? Almost as if to say, that energy or whatever it is, this is our job. What are you doing making crop circles when we do this? Other people think that the action, the meditation, the creation of the form somehow connects with Mother Earth and creates the phenomena. And then you have situations where people have videotaped these little light balls, anywhere from the size of a tennis ball to a basketball, over some of these crop formations that just seem to be floating around. It's quite a mystery, even though many of them are man-made.
Steve, we've been talking about a lot of the mysteries around Point Pleasant. It did bring up Dogman. You got the Bray Road case, but you're doing some of your investigations from Michigan. We have a number of guests who are with us for one reason or another. We find out they're from Michigan too. Barbara has her UFO story from Michigan. What's in the water in Michigan?
Well, if it's Flint, Michigan, you don't want to drink it. Heard the story. It's funny because Bill Konkoleski is the head of Michigan MUFON, and for those that may not know, MUFON is the Mutual UFO Network. Bill does a great job of running the Michigan branch, and we used to have our meetings out there in Flint. So it was quite a few running jokes about the water situation out there, which I still not sure that they have under control. So maybe we can blame Flint.
Okay. Yeah. It just seems like we always have several guests who it just turns out that they're from Michigan. Lon Krieger and his ancient garden beds in the Michigan copper trade, and Ron Radmacher. Now you get. It seems like there's just a lot of interesting things going on in Michigan. Ancient stories, some newer ones with the say the Kinross. UFO. Case study. Or just hearing a little bit about everything up there. I've been talking with Ron. He's made some comments about the Kinross case, but there's also the inevitable swamp gas cover-up. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the swamp gas is being used to divert our attention from these events?
Yeah, definitely. By the way, that book I was trying to remember by Dr. Gregory Little is called People of the Web. It's one you have to buy from third-party sellers, but it's a fascinating book. Yes, actually Hynek was he goofed up. He was Hynek and Dr. Jacques Vallée were colleagues, and Vallée came over from France in 1960, and he was a computer scientist, mathematician. He was another one of these guys that originally thought that UFOs were ET. Wrote some fascinating books. Challenge to Science, which documents a UFO wave of landings in France in the middle 50s. So Vallée was a little bit disappointed that Hynek kind of blew it. But what Hynek was actually saying is he thought that some of the sightings could be explained as swamp gas, most particularly the Hillsdale sightings, Hillsdale, Michigan. there was a all-girls school at the time, a college that where they saw it. Now, I don't think that it was swamp gas, but it was just the press ran with it. But 10 years later, by that time, as Keel said, Dr. Hynek became one of the good guys. He left Project Blue Book, thank God, and he started the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston, Illinois. And he spoke at the 1976 MUFON Symposium, which I was able to attend because it was actually close enough to where I lived. And that was a great, for me, I just hadn't been exposed to anything like that. Dr. Hynek was there. Ray Stanford was there to investigate the Socorro, New Mexico landing. Jacques Vallée was actually supposed to be there, but he wasn't able to make it. But Dr. Hynek had a talk that was called Swamp Gas Plus 10 and Counting. And so he recounted those days. I actually have that recording that I put on CD. But he was, by that time he had developed a serious investigation group. There was another guy named there called, Dr. Webb. I can't think of what his first name was. He wrote a book called 1973, Year of the Humanoid, because there were a whole wave of landings with humanoid encounters that year. So it was. It's just that it wasn't. It's too much a cover up, really, as more the press. Just the press is one dimensional and just latches onto something, but Hynek was very engaging, and he showed us some of the cartoons of the day. And there's one that I wish I could project it, but you see a landed saucer, and you see these little green men with these very powerful ray guns, and they accost a human on the street, and they say, "Take us to the one that called us swamp gas." So he had several cartoons. He was having a good time because it was, for him, it was sort of his, sort of making up for past mistakes or past misunderstandings and that sort of thing. And so he was, and that about that time too, he wrote the book The UFO Experience, which first talked about these first three close encounter categories. So I think that, of course, swamp gas survives to this day as a running joke, and we'll never lose the marsh gas or the swamp gas.
With the remaining time, we don't need to focus on swamp gas. Keep talking about the more concrete evidence. And if we look at the geography of Mason County, do you think that it could support a breeding pair of Mothmen?
I don't know. You see, when people ask me, what was the Mothman? Now, John Keel didn't know. I mean, he'd studied this for years. John Keel thought it was just going to be a big bird of some kind. And he joked in the Mothman prophecies that he oiled up his monster traps and headed off to Point Pleasant. But the thing is, what I tell people is the Mothman was a paradox. Again, it was about 7 feet tall, grayish, sometimes people said black, maybe a 10-foot wingspan. So there were about over 100 people who reported this thing fairly consistently, although there's always aberrations. Tom Urey saw something more like a thunderbird. He did not see the Mothman per se. And the thing is, it didn't act like a biological creature. Some said that a 10-foot wingspan wouldn't be wide enough to uplift a creature that tall, or a being that tall. The eyes did seem to generate its own light. People talked about that. It wasn't merely eye shine. It wouldn't always flap its wings. The wings would move out a little bit, and it would take off straight like a helicopter. John Keel. Now, none of this was printed in the books or his articles, which are plentiful, by the way. I encourage people to check out John Keel and his writings on Amazon. But it turned out that he had a few people tell him that when it was close, they thought they could hear something like a motor or some kind of a humming. Now, this just throws a wrench in the works. Now, if it was some kind of a drone, a highly advanced drone that they were messing with us back in the 60s, why the heck did people suddenly encounter paranormal phenomena, poltergeist phenomena, when they got home? There was Keel talks about I'm trying to remember, he was a judge, I think. He was a very prominent person, and he wasn't able to name him. But he saw this thing. He went out on his front porch and saw this thing standing in his yard. 10 or 15 minutes later, he came out of a trance, and then it took off. So it was a mass of contradictions. And frankly, when you try and look at the entire scope of the Mothman experience, Brent Rains had he never met John Keel, but he had a long relationship, a correspondence, and on the phone. And Keel told Brent Rains that all the things that happened in Point Pleasant, it would have taken 6 books to cover everything. And as it was, the Mothman Prophecies was cut in half. The editors chopped out half of it. And Keel was able to salvage some of that in his follow-up book called The Eighth Tower. So we just have a fraction of what happened there. But to get back to your original question, I tend not to think this was just some kind of undiscovered cryptid. I don't know what the heck it was. It just it's a paradox. It's a mass of contradictions.
Okay, and you have to check out that Eighth Tower. I didn't realize that.
Well, let me, just before you go on, there's a couple other books that have been published now. Doug Skinner was a good friend of Keel's for a long time. Doug Skinner runs a website called johnkeel.com. He has a couple of my friends helped him salvage a bunch of John's stuff when he died. And Doug Skinner has put all kinds of stuff on this website, stuff from when he was a kid and just everything. And there have been 2 books that are published by New Saucerian where they've taken some of that stuff from that website. And a lot of it are Keel's notes. There's some of the writings that became the Mothman Prophecies later. So you've got books, the Big Breakthrough and the Big Blackout, which will expand your knowledge of the Mothman Prophecies. It'll add to it, as well as the Eighth Tower.
Okay, cool. Barbara, do you think we'll be going to johnkeel.com to try to get some more guests?
I would say that absolutely we will.
Yeah.
It's a great resource. I have never asked Doug Skinner to be on, but he would be I'll have to tell you, John Keel, I know we're running out of time, but John Keel had a great sense of humor. And one time when, now Doug Skinner brought one of his books for John to sign, but it was a used one. He didn't buy a new one. So it's all battered and beaten. And so John wrote in the sleeve of the book, he said, "To my friend John Skinner, who's too cheap to buy a new copy of my book."
Okay. That's a good story. I like that one.
But Keel is, and a couple other things. For a while there, and I won't get into it, but for a while Keel was being forgotten. When he had a little bit of a resurgence when the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, came out in, what was it, 2003, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And but the only thing that had been republished was, I think, The Mothman Prophecies, a lot of stuff, and his articles were lost at the time. I mean, all the stuff, great stuff he had written in these magazines, but now they've been resurrected. But people like Nick Redfern and Black Diary, he talks about, in one of his chapters, he says John Keel was ahead of his time. And wherever he is now, he probably still is. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, in the foreword to Brent Rain's book on John Keel, said John, saw the interconnectedness between all paranormal phenomena. And even, you know who David Paulides is, of course, the missing 411 guy. Well, I saw him at an event in the Pittsburgh area, and he was talking to Stan Gordon. And so we're all standing around listening to this. And at one point, David Paulides stopped, and he said, John Keel, he was way ahead of his time. And I went, yes, finally, he's come back into vogue. People that didn't know anything about him now know about him. We've got Brent Rain's book has been out. So it just does my heart good because, I can't get through a radio show or a conversation about the paranormal without referencing John Keel or something that he discovered.
Yeah, and it's nice that you have these anecdotes, like how he signed your friend's book. It's there's just those little things like that. That just gives me, Barbara, the listeners, and the Human Billboard, and Seminole Lisa, and all the other people who are here each week. Just that little personal touch about just say an author that gives us a new insight into him or her. It's a great story.
Well, I guess I was on Brent's show with Rosemary Ellen Guiley last year, and she knew him through the 90s, and I can't think of any other ones at the moment, but he had quite a sense of humor. He was very kind of mischievous, and he just was really an amazing individual.
Okay, and Steve, we're down to 3 minutes. We need to tell everyone about the Mothman conference or festival, and about your shows.
Okay. The Mothman Festival is the third weekend in September. You'll see me around there doing one thing or another. You make sure you get on that hay ride. That's the only thing that costs a few bucks, so check it out. I'll be going to the Exeter, New Hampshire Festival with the Mac Maloney crew over Labor Day. I will be at the Van Meter Visitor Festival in Van Meter, Iowa, west of Des Moines, the last weekend in September, about another winged creature. I'm on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files as a correspondent every week. I do the High Strangeness Factor every other week on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And I'll be speaking in Toledo as well, October 12th, the Bigfoot Paranormal event. I forget the exact name. But anyway, I think that pretty much covers it. And listen, I really appreciate you guys having me on your show tonight.
Yeah, Steve, we had a lot of fun, and we're going to have to do it again, get some kind of round table together with some other people, and just keep the conversation moving ahead about what we need to know about the unexplained.
Well, there's no end to it, and it's also endlessly fascinating.
It really is. And I just want to thank you and Kat for being great guests. Barbara, you want to wrap it up? We have a show Sunday, and we'll be back next Monday and Tuesday of next week as well. Barbara, you have any conclusions?
I want to thank you and your guests. It was a fabulous show, and I'm sure that everyone will enjoy it in archive because we get tons of people there. And as you said, we've got 2 shows next week. And
3.
We're looking 3 shows next week.
What?
Don't book any more.
Only 3.
Only 3. So good night. Good night to both of you, and good night to those listening. Thanks for joining us. We've had a great time. Hope you have too. Tune in next week.